Welcome to OAA Now, your home for Oakland Activities Association news and information. Here's your host, Sammy Taormina.
Welcome to OAA Now. Here I'm Sammy Taormina, blogger around the OAA, the host of Last Week Brain Cells, and the host between Taormina's and Orion. I'd like to welcome those watching on the local voice on SoundCloud and those watching on Orion. A lot to look at here on this week's edition of the podcast here, as we're in the final week of the 2024-2025 school year. When it comes to school sports, I mean, state finals take place this week. We have golf. We have baseball, softball. No OAA teams remain. And also we have girls soccer state finals. Of course, Troy Athens is in the state semifinals. So we'll look at Troy Athens' path as they take on Saline this upcoming week. On Wednesday. And if they win that, they'll either get Byron Center or Northville in the state final. It'll be on Saturday at Michigan State. So a lot to look at here, as I mentioned here this week. We're going to recap the baseball, softball results. Of course, I mentioned on no OA teams remain. So without further ado, let's look at our breaking story here. That's over at Rochester Adams. They have a new girls basketball coach. And it's a familiar face for the program. Justin Howard, longtime assistant, takes over the job for Joe Malberg. The MHA website confirmed the hire. Obviously, as I mentioned, Howard's very familiar with the system, very familiar with the program there, what he brings there. Obviously, being an assistant under Shea Lewis. Of course, a lot of people around this generation don't remember Shea Lewis used to be the coach at Rochester Adams. She's now the coach at Schoolcraft College. Been coaching there a long time. She's done a really nice job with Schoolcraft. I think a lot of people questioned Lewis, obviously, later in her tenure at Adams, obviously, favorites with Maddie DeLinga, obviously. But, you really look at, the culture at Adams. When Malberg came there, it was not a good spot. And, Malberg did a really nice job fixing the culture there. Just for him, it was just about winning the results. And, obviously Adams, they had to take some lumps. They went to the blue, really had a hard time in that division, just couldn't be able to, overcome that division. They're still there. So, it was interesting, obviously. But I think what really did Malberg in was that loss to Romeo in the first round. Romeo lost their two best players, and it just snowballed, and they ended up. Adams was a team that was finished 10-11. Injuries really did them in. They had a lot of injuries, especially to their top player, Faith Olis, and they weren't able to, they were able to go up and down, but they just weren't able to get over that hump. And, and unfortunately, it led to Malberg being let go over there at Adams, and Adams going a different direction. So now Howard brings to this team is obviously, this program's obvious familiarity. He's paid his dues. He's, been around these girls a long time. He knows the program inside and out. I'll be curious to see how he handles the middle school programs, particularly at Van Heusen and also at West, because that's where most of the student athletes that go to Adams are usually there. Obviously West is split between Adams and Rochester. So that's really where, I think that's where Howard's going to have to look at, particularly the ones at Van Heusen, when it comes to program strength and developing a program. So I'll be curious to see what Howard does with developing program strength. I think that's going to be the key for him going forward is can he keep the success building program strength that Malberg did while also, trying to find that past success that under Coach Shea Lewis. So, so really that's going to be the challenge for them is finding that success under Lewis compared to the program building that was done under Malberg. So that's Howard's challenge is can he do that in both? Can he do it in both? So that's going to be something to really keep an eye on with Howard. Then you look at the returnees for Adams. I mean, obviously for them, it starts and ends with Faye Zolas. I mean, Zolas coming back is going to be a huge plus for Howard. Considering, Zolas has done a really nice job with this program. I mean, obviously, she's the face of the program. She's your top player. She's been getting a lot of the attention. But Jordan Jarrell, I really think, honestly, is the heart and soul of this team. I think Jordan Jarrell, obviously last year she took, she had some great games for Malberg. She had some really good games. But I really think if there was one player that I think is the heart and soul of this team, I think it's Jordan Jarrell. It's pretty easy said than done. Also, you got Layla Tomczak, who's another very good player, another I think 2-3 year player for Malberg. I mean under Malberg that Howard will rely on. Reagan Moore didn't play a lot, but she'll be a big piece. Alyssa Stevens is another one who I expect to see some big minutes this year. Nora Kamaj is another one, and then Nadia Hapner. Obviously, we know the Hapner name at Troy Athens has been legendary. Nadia has been really good as a thrower, shot putter, and a discus thrower. She's very athletic. One of those big players in the interior is going to help out this team. So really now, I think what the athletic department is saying now is, now it's going to be on you guys. It's going to be on you guys. And, I think for the players, it's a new opportunity. It's a big opportunity for them to handle this challenge, to handle the adversity that, the move's going to bring. It's a person. It's a person that they're familiar with. Obviously, you look at Howard, you think about the path that he's been through. Obviously, you kind of compare it to almost that of Bob Bridges' path when he at Lake Orion, when he worked under Steve Roberts and Mike Griffin before he got his shot. But he was awesome. But with Bridges, he was a former coach at Boomba Hills Gloucester and also Waterford Mott for a time. But you look at the success that Bridges has had with Lake Orion. You kind of think about, could that be the same success that Howard has at Rochester Adams? Now, there's some question marks with Howard, obviously, when you look at with Adams, is obviously you look at that city rivalry, with Rochester and Stony Creek. Both those schools are going to be in the red this year. Particularly you look at Rochester under a first-year coach. They did a really nice job, but it always helps when you have a player like Alice Max and Kylie Robinson to go to. So with Rochester, you know what I mean? Now you look at them and you look at a player like Taylor Parsons who can make some noise. You look at others within that team ready to step up, take that next step. Rochester can be a scary team. They could be very scary. But that's a team that Howard's going to have to deal with in the future. And the other team that they're going to have to deal with is Stony Creek. So when you look at Stony Creek, obviously, you look at the job that Columbus Williams has done. Obviously, what he did in his first year, getting to state quarterfinals. Obviously, what helped him was he had a very experienced team. Almost, and then basically he had Kellen James's entire assistant coaching staff. But, they put in the work and, they got to say quarterfinals. So, but last year, this was a team that took a step back. Now you look at this year's team for Stony Creek, obviously. You got the Kalash sisters. You have, you have, you have a couple other players coming back. But I think the key player for that team, Samantha Fulkerson. I think obviously last year it was Jalen Freeman who, took a lot of her minutes. Obviously we know the story of Freeman when she transferred in from Port Huron Northern. And obviously you look at, the question marks surrounding her. So I just think when you look at, Stony Creek, I think Stony Creek can be it could be a solid team this year. I think it could be solid with Freeman, the Avash sisters. But I think Fulkerson's the key. I really think she's the key for this to work because, and obviously I really felt last year she kind of got the raw end of the stick the majority of the time. But I'm curious to see what Stony Creek does. But that's another, team that Howard's going to have to face with, when he's at Adams. I mean, but obviously what helps is he knows those two teams. So that'll help a lot when it comes to the city rivalries. They're going to have to play them, you know what I mean? Because usually I think Adams will get one of them. I think they're in the crosstown this year. I think they are. So we'll see what happens there with that. But then let's look at the division Adams is in. The blue division, as I mentioned. Obviously you got, obviously you got Harper Woods. Harper Woods last year was up and down under Coach Latoya Tate. They should be in the conversation to contend. But like I said, program strength for Harper Woods has been a big, big concern when I look at the Pioneers. That's really going to be where I just think that for Howard, I think it's going to come down to obviously is Harper Woods. They do got some experience coming back, but there's some question marks with this team. There is some serious question marks with the Pioneers when you look at this team. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. It'll be very interesting to see what happens. Next, we have A&T. Obviously, Coach Shakita Coltrane has done a really nice job with the Warriors. But they lost a lot of talent. So I'm curious to see the program strength component of A&T, how they're going to handle that. So that could be a real interesting challenge for them. Can they handle, they lost a lot of talent. They lost a lot of experience. So that's going to be something to really, really keep an eye on can A&T, can they find a way to, overcome their losses? And I think they can surprise some people. So, so we'll see what happens to A&T going forward with them. Next, we have Ferndale. Ferndale, of course, they're the only team in the league that does not have a coach as of yet. But as I mentioned with them, there's still a lot of question marks when it comes to this roster. Ferndale's been a team that does not, last season, I don't know why they went to the red. They did get some wins against Stony Creek and Lake Orion. But still, when you don't have a lot of depth, when you don't have program strength, you're a team that does not belong in this division. And I'm not being mean here, but it was clear as day. Even though Ferndale won a district title, got the regional final, they just did not belong in this division because in the red, you always have to have depth. You always have to have program strength, and you look at the teams of, in that division. When you look at teams like Oxford, Lake Orion, Stony Creek, even though Stony Creek's got two teams, Clarkston, West Bloomfield, those teams besides Stony Creek have three programs. They have a freshman program, they have a JV program, and they have a varsity program. And you look at the long-term success is why these teams have been very successful. Then you look at with Rochester, you know what I mean? Rochester, they got 3 programs. You look at, obviously with Coach Howard's team, he's going to have 3 programs. But for Ferndale, I think for me, it just comes down to is, will they be able to field the team this year? That is the big question that Ferndale has coming up. And that's really going to be the big question is, can Ferndale be able to field a team, and can they get the right person in there to just, 1, be patient with them, 2, build a program, and, and if they do that, I think Ferndale could be a surprise team. But I really think Adams' greatest challenges in the division is going to be from both Troy schools. I think both Troy schools will present a challenge for Adams. I'm going to start with Troy Athens. Stacy Klump's done a really nice job with that program. I've seen summer ball with them, and Troy Athens, they do look good. I mean, they're looking really good. They're looking solid. So when I look at Troy Athens, historically, this team has had a habit of not being consistent, whether it's been injuries or inconsistent play. Troy Athens really hasn't been able to put things together. They really haven't. So could this be the year that Coach J.C. Klump and the rest of the Red Hawks, can they put it together? They have the talent. They have the competitive nature to do it. They're going to be competitive. Don't get me wrong. But the question for me with Troy Athens is going to be is, can they put it together in a critical spot? Because if they don't, they could be in for a long year. So that's going to be the challenge that I have with Athens is, can they put it together? And if they do, they're probably going to be one of the top teams in the division. If not, they can be for a long year. Then you look at Troy, who I think should be the favorite in this division, considering who they got coming back. You look at Carly Higginbottom in the post. You look at Macy Zeider. You look at Kelsey Block. You look at Diamond Prince coming back. Diamond Prince last year injured her knee. She got hurt in the Troy Athens game. When she is motivated, when she is focused, Diamond Prince is one of the best players in Oakland County. When she's not, she complains. She has a bad temper tantrum. They're in trouble. I mean, then you look at obviously Macy Zeider. I mean, Macy Zeider had a nice year freshman year. Obviously, you don't expect to, come from middle school and go up and put at least like 20, 25 a night. Zeider's more than capable of doing that. I mean, you look at her stats. I mean, she's more than capable. And then you look at Kelsey Block, solid defender. Carly Higginbottom in the interior. So when I look at Troy and I look at the Colts, you think to yourself, and you got that, that freshman class going to be sophomores, going to have another year under their belt. They're going to be better. So I think Troy right now, when I look at Coach Laura Guzman's team on paper, they should be the favorite in this division. They should be, with who they got coming back. I'd be shocked if, and I think Adams, they could give Troy a game. They could. I mean, but the question's going to be, obviously Troy has that experience being in the red. They were in the white last year. Now they're down in the blue. So, there's nowhere to go but up for Troy. It really isn't. But if you're Adams and you're Coach Howard, you're looking at the division, you got to think about who are my toughest teams going to deal with in the division? And right now, when you think about it, it's Troy and Troy Athens. Harper Woods is your wild card. A&T, I don't know what they're going to have back. I really don't know what they're going to have back. That's the big question that I have with A&T. You don't know what's going to happen with them. Harper Woods, obviously with depth. Depth could be a big issue for Harper Woods. I mean, that is a big-time question mark. And then Ferndale, we don't know what you're going to have. And then the district. Where will they do with Adams? What will the MHA do with Adams? Could they keep Adams in a district similar to last year, where they were in a district with Utica Eisenhower, Romeo, Utica, Rochester, and Stony Creek? Now, when you look at that district, if that's the case, that district will be back at Utica Eisenhower. And we know that gym. Utica Eisenhower has a very small gym. Very small gym. Where the home side has their own section to themselves. Whereas if you're the visitors, you got to go upstairs and sit. That's brutal. That is really, really brutal for the visiting team. They have the same setup over at Utica. Same setup at Sterling Heights Stevenson. They don't really have that same setup at Utica Ford. They really don't. Even though the gym space is pretty similar. But I just think, when you look at Utica Eisenhower, Utica, and Sterling Heights Stevenson, they're very similar in gym size. Very similar. The other scenario I could see Adams maybe going is going north. North to Lake Orion. To see possibly a district with Lake Orion, Romeo, Clarkston, Waterford. Possibility. I mean, Avondale could be in there too, maybe, but it's not. I don't see Avondale with Lake Orion. I just don't see it. Considering, with some of these teams going up, based on enrollment. So, Adams, there is a ton of district options for them. We'll know a lot more next week. Usually MHA releases the districts after the baseball, softball, and girls soccer tournaments. They want to be out as bad as everybody else does. And this is the last week of the 2024-25 season. So my take on Howard over at Adams, I love the hire. It's a familiar, players are familiar with him. Howard's paid his dues. This is a golden opportunity for him. This is a golden opportunity. Yes, he lacks varsity coaching experience. That's the only downside I have with him. But the kids love him. Kids will work hard for him. His challenge is program strength. He's going to rely a lot on his experienced players, especially Faith Zolas and Jordan Jarrell, to carry the load. I think it'll be very interesting to see how that goes. It'll be really, really interesting to see how that one goes. Because for Adams, this is an opportunity. They have a chance to win this division. They got a chance to win this division. They got to get it done. That's the big question. Even though I know Troy stands in their way. So that's going to be interesting to see how this division will work, how Adams fits into this situation. It'll be interesting to see how this team performs, under a new coach, new but very familiar coach. So that's going to be the challenge that Adams faces. That's going to be the challenge that this team has. So we'll see what happens. We're going to see what happens. Obviously, with this hire, it's a big hire. I really, expect there's going to be a transition period. And unfortunately for Adams, it has to happen during the season. And that's the big challenge that I see with Adams is can they handle, going through that transition period. But unfortunately for players and parents, it's going to have to happen during the year. So we'll see what happens. We're going to see what happens going forward there. But, for Adams, they finally got their coach. Now they can focus on summer league, summer ball, getting everything situated, ready to go. Focused on summer ball, getting ready for that, and going from there. So we'll see what happens. Okay, now let's look at recapping the week that was. Obviously, let's go with girls soccer first. One school remains, and that's Troy Athens. Redhawks had to knock off Utica Eisenhower in penalty kicks. Then they had to knock out Macomb Dakota also in penalty kicks. So it's been really interesting. Now they knocked out Dakota in overtime, actually 3-1. I mean, I was thinking the Troy game where they went penalty kicks. I was thinking that. So I really think about with Troy Athens is the fact that they're here, that they're in the state semis, a lot of experience, that helps things. Really does. As I mentioned with Athens, there were some, Athens was one of those teams that could seriously make a run at this thing. They could. They went through a district that had Troy in there that went penalties. And then they had to knock off Utica Eisenhower, a team that won that vaunted district, that top district over at them, that had all the Utica schools and all the Rochester schools in there. Utica Eisenhower was a team that had a lot of D1 recruits on that team. A lot of kids that were going to D1 schools. So that was a big, big deal for them. And I knew last week that game was going to go penalties. I knew last week that was going to go penalties. And then they had to knock off Macomb Dakota, which that game went overtime. Athens trailed early, and then scored the equalizer late in the second half. And then first overtime didn't really score. And then second overtime, they scored 2 goals. And that was your ballgame. So now Troy Athens moves on to take on Saline in the state semifinals. We had Oxford that was also in the Division One state in the Division One regionals. They lost a tough one on penalty kicks to Heartland, 1-0. Over at Grand Blanc. It was a tough one. You look at the success Oxford's had this senior class at Oxford. Obviously football, boys basketball. Now you had girls soccer. They had a really, really nice year. Unfortunately for them, they couldn't get by Heartland. Heartland ended up losing a tough one to Northville, 4-0. Now Northville's in the Final Four. They're going to take on Byron Center, which that's going to be interesting. I think that one's at East Lansing. So that'll be really interesting to see how that one goes between Byron Center and Northville. But for Oxford, they had a nice year. They had a really nice year. Now let's look at the matchup between Troy Athens and Saline. Obviously, you look at the Hornets. Saline, I didn't think was really tested in their district, nor in their regional. They were dominant against Plymouth Salem, winning 4-0 against the Rocks. This is going to be a really, really interesting matchup at Seaholm. And I'm curious to see how the MHA chose Seaholm as a site for this one. Because if you think about it, the venue, the location has to favor Troy Athens because of, obviously it's in the east side. Celine's got to make that travel up M14 to I-75. Or the M14 to 275, all the way to Telegraph. So that'll be interesting. I think that could be a very interesting matchup. I think Troy Athens has been more battle tested than Celine. But I think that could be a really, really good game. I think that could be a really interesting game. Do I think that game goes penalties? Probably not. I don't see how that game goes penalties. I'd be really shocked if that game went penalties because of, obviously the way that both these teams have been playing. So it'll be really interesting to see how that matchup goes on Wednesday night. Which I think could be a really entertaining game over there at CM. It could be really entertaining. So we'll see how that one goes. We're gonna see how that one goes. So, but if Troy Athens were to win, I'll write a column, preview it. The final matchup either against Byron Center or Northville, which would be a very interesting matchup for the Red Hawks. So right now, Troy Athens they're in a good path right now. Really, really good path right now. So we'll see how that one goes. Then let's recap, obviously boys golf. Adams finished second place. Nobody Detroit Catholic Central won the boys state championship. Adams was number 2. Lake Orion was 9th. And Bloomfield Hills was 10th in Division 1. So, so it was a good year for golf. Obviously Adams having a chance to win the Division 1 state championship, but just could not, couldn't overcome Nobody Detroit Catholic Central's depth. That ended up being the difference. So it was a good year for golf. Great year for golf. 3 OAA teams made the state final in golf. So congratulations there on a great year in golf. So, so we'll see what happens. Then let's recap. We're going to go softball first because softball saw all 3 OAA teams' run end in the regional semifinal. Actually, all 4 teams end in the regional semifinal. Royal Oak could not overcome Utica Ford. And I knew it would be a tall order for them, despite being at home. It's just, when you have a lot of experience that Ford has, and obviously we know how good Larry Joseph has been as a coach, particularly in girls basketball, but he also coaches softball as well, almost very similar to that of Laura Guzman at Troy. You look at that matchup, you kind of think about for Royal Oak was, you look at, obviously the strength of schedule component. If you're Royal Oak, would you have to think about now having to play a tougher slate? Because if you're Royal Oak, if you're the Ravens, you kind of think about maybe challenging yourself to play against some of these state powers. Obviously, if you want to get better as a program, you're going to have to man up. You're going to have to man up and play some of these perennial powerhouses. You just can't go and play like teams that, middle of the pack teams that, that you can beat. You're more than capable of beating. You're going to have to play tough. You're going to have to play a very difficult schedule. And I think what cost Royal Oak in their game against Ford was scheduling, especially non-conference schedule. Because, you look at that scenario there where, you know, you look at the district Royal Oak was in. Yes, it was a good district with Troy, Athens, and Berkeley. I mean, you look at, obviously, Berkeley had a really nice year. But now you're going to have to question and say, okay, who do I have to play? Should I play a Grand Blanc? Should I play a Wall Lake Northern, a Lake Orion, or a Howell, or a Heartland? I mean, you have to play somebody. You got to play somebody. I mean, heck, even go play a team like Macomb, Dakota, or Port Huron Northern, or a Macomb, Dakota. I mean, they're going to give you games. If you get blown out, if you get blown out in the regular season, that's a life lesson for you. Because, now you know what you got to do. You know what you got to do to get better, and it prepares you for the postseason. So I think in that game for Royal Oak against Ford, it kind of showed, the scheduling, the parity in the leagues. I mean, it showed its ugly head for Royal Oak. And for Utica Ford, they ended up getting to the regional final where they took on Port Huron Northern, who shocked Utica Eisenhower. And then they knocked off, and then Utica Ford knocked them off. So now Utica Ford moves on to the state quarterfinals. They play on a Tuesday. And then, but for Royal Oak, it just comes down for me with them is they got to play more tougher teams. I mean, that's my challenge for them is they're going to have to play tougher competition if they're going to experience success. That's how you look at it with them. They have to play tougher teams. If they get beat bad, they get beat bad. It's a learning experience. So if I'm their coaching staff next year, I look at toughening up their non-conference. I look at toughening it up. They got to do it. Because that is the only way that they're going to get better. Same with Harper Woods. Harper Woods, they ran into Dearborn Devon Child. Dearborn Devon Child, the state powerhouse. We know how good the Falcons are. And I knew it was going to be a tall order for Harper Woods. It was going to be a really, really tall order for them. Playing Dearborn Devon Child. It was going to be tough. So Harper Woods next year, they're going to have to play tough competition. They're going to have to play better competition. But I know in that area, you look at, they played Detroit Denby. They played, I think for Harper Woods, it's just going north. They got to go north. They got to go north and play these teams. They got to go north. Because if they don't, they'll experience some success. But going forward, if they go north, play like a team like Grosse Pointe North, Grosse Pointe South, just measure up. That's what I'd tell them. I would tell the Pioneers, measure up. Same thing I'd tell them, measure up. Then there is Bloomfield Hills. Now, this region, there was a big upset here. Farmville's Mercy ranked number 1 in the state, coming in, featuring one of the best pitchers game in Caitlin Paluzzi, going to Alabama. And I don't know how Northville's pitching staff shut down Farmville's Mercy's bats, especially when you look at the strength of that team, considering they can hit. And then they held them scoreless. And Northville got 1 run on them. And the Mustangs shocked the Marlins 1-0. My reaction to that, I couldn't believe it. Because Farmville's Mercy was a team that was destined to get back to East Lansing. They were destined to get back after what happened to them against Hudsonville. They got destroyed by Hudsonville. And yet Northville's pitching staff pitched a great game. They pitched a great game against them. So then you kind of figure, okay, Bills might have a chance here. Now they got to play South Lyon. South Lyon was a team that was a Final Four team a year ago. I mean, obviously the pitcher that they had a nice game against Lake Orion last year. I'm taking over for Ava Bradshaw. I don't remember the name though. I mean the name South Lyon starting pitcher. But she did a pretty good job against Bloomfield Hills, holding that high octane offense to 1 run. Bloomfield Hills only had 1 run. And the Lions ended up winning that one 6-1. Now, South Lyon and Northville met in the state final. In the regional final, South Lyon ended up winning 3-0. Obviously, the play of Izzy News has been really big for them. The South Lions now back in the state quarters. They got a chance to get to the state final. They got a chance. They do. They got a good chance. And then there is the region over in Grand Blanc. You know, when I look at this one, when you look at Grand Blanc ranked 5th in the state, Walled Lake Northern 6th in the state, Howell's been really good all year, and Lake Orion's been really good all year. I was more shocked about Lake Orion, you know, considering the experience that this team had, getting in the state final last year, the presence of Riley Lineberger, and she gets rocked against the Knights. Now, Walled Lake Northern's got some good players on that team, but I just couldn't believe that. At one point, Walled Lake Northern had a 10-1 lead. At one point. And I'm going to myself, what's going on with this team? What's going on? I mean, this is not supposed to happen. I mean, to see a pitcher like Riley Lineberger get rocked. The fact that Coach Joe Whiteer had to use 3 pitchers in that game. The fact that, you know, it was shocking. It was shocking, to say the least. I was shocked when I looked at that score. You know, in Walled Lake Northern, I mean, yeah, they were up 1-0. Lake Orion had a chance to at least tie up, couldn't do it, and then Walled Lake Northern exploded. They exploded. And then the fact that at one point they got within 10-1. I'm going like, what's going on here? What's going on? What happened? What happened? So I couldn't believe it. Lake Orion battled back, made the score respectable, 10-6. They just couldn't get more runs. They just couldn't get it. And they ended up falling 10-6. So now there's some questions with the Dragons next year. You look at next year with softball around the OAA. Obviously, Bloomfield Hills will still be a contender. Clarkson, I think, is going to be better. Lake Orion, I don't know. Stony Creek, I don't know. There's a lot of questions next year. A lot of questions in softball in the OAA. A lot of questions. So now let's go from softball to baseball. Baseball, West Bloomfield took on Northville in the Super Regional, in the regional final. Had a good game against them, Northville. Some controversy late in that one. Northville ended up winning that one 4-3. So there was some controversy in that one, obviously. So, you know, for West Bloomfield, they had a nice year. A real nice year. So it'd be interesting to see how West Bloomfield does next year. Getting to that point, I know they lose a lot of experience. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with them going forward. I just think when you look at West Bloomfield, they lose a lot of talent. They lost a lot of talent. So it'll be interesting to see how they do next year. They do lose a lot. So for West Bloomfield, really, really tough loss. Northville went on to the regional final to take on Heartland. Heartland ended up beating Northville to win that. Now they're in the Final Four. Of course, baseball, it's a little different because you have the regional final and then you have the state quarterfinal on the same day. So, so it's a little different. It is a little bit different. So, but still, you know what I mean? Everything looks the same. Now Heartland's in the Final Four, going to compete at Michigan State. For West Bloomfield, a lot of what ifs. So, we'll see what happens going forward. Then we have Lake Orion. Lake Orion ended up taking on Davison in the regional final at Grand Blanc. It was a pretty tight game throughout. Lake Orion and Davison were both tied at 2-2. Majority of the game, Lake Orion ended up getting a big hit. A sacrifice fly, getting it 3-2. Then they had an assurance run, making it 4-2. Bottom line is, when you look at Lake Orion, they knocked off Davison 4-2. It was a good game, really good game. Lake Orion did just enough to get to that game. Now, what stood before them was they had to go play Birmingham Brother Rice. Macomb Dakota, who knocked off Birmingham Brother Rice 2-0 behind dominant pitching. Their pitching was really good that game. So now Lake Orion has to see 1B. Birmingham Brother Rice saw 1A. And Macomb Dakota's pitcher was outstanding. He had a good game. And then Macomb Dakota played a lot of small ball. Ended up getting a 4-0 win against Lake Orion. Now they're back into the state semifinals. But when you look at the year Lake Orion had, considering where this team was before the season started, this was a team ranked in the top 10 in the state of Michigan. Then they had a lot of struggles. They really struggled, which saw them get swept by Adams, lose series to Rochester. They lost to, Clarkston. They lost to Oxford. They lost nearly almost every series in the red. Maybe the exception's Troy Athens, and they still lost the game to Troy Athens. I think they did lose that series to Troy Athens. The fact that this was a team that had a lot of bad luck. A lot of bad luck. Where they have good moments and they have bad moments. Then you get to the postseason where they had to play Rochester. Had to survive that one, 2-1. Then they go and play Rochester Adams in the district final. Everybody around the state said that's an upset. Here's the thing with me. I never considered that an upset. Because I knew Lake Orion was a good team to start the year. They just have had a lot of bad luck. And then they went and beat Port Huron Northern. Port Huron Northern, we knew how good they were on their graduation night. Lake Orion ended up winning that one 8-1. And they knocked off Davison before falling to Dakota. That kind of tells you how baseball can be a real funny game at times. It can be. But you never know. You never know. When a team gets hot, you don't want to see that team when they get hot. Perfect example, look at the 2024 Detroit Tigers. Look at what they did. So when I look at baseball next year, West Boone and Lake Orion, I still think both teams are going to have some solid players back. Adams will be a team to watch for. Rochester will be a team to watch for. Obviously, Boone Bay Hills could be really interesting. Groves is another team to watch as we head next year. Harper Woods, could they be a team that could finally break through? So a lot of questions in baseball next year. So we'll see what happens going forward. We're going to see what happens. Now we go into the end of the year stuff. Obviously, end of spring sports. I know Troy Athens is still playing. They got Saline coming up on Wednesday, and whoever wins that's going to take on either Byron Center or Northville. I think the league had a nice year. I really did. And then now you look at conference realignment coming up. I know we're getting really close to that. The OAA was affected by that. When you look at this conference, obviously you look at both Waterford Kettering and Waterford Mott both coming in next year. That's going to be a big deal for the league. But also the league's going to lose 2 members in Farmington and North Farmington. Both those 2 teams are going to lead the conference for the Lakes Valley Conference. Now, the Lakes Valley Conference obviously got stronger with the Livonia schools and the Farmington schools leaving to join that conference. So basically, when you look at the conference, they're going to drop from 25 schools back to 23. We've always originally been at 23 schools. But now you got to think about what this conference is. What will this conference do? Will they stand put? Could they expand? I think, with this, you never know with leagues. You never know what drives teams to either join a league or leave a league. And, I'm curious to see within this next year, within the next school year, how the conference is going to look, how everything's going to look. Considering, you have Waterford Kettering and Waterford Mott coming into the league this winter. Of course, Waterford Kettering, Waterford Mott in fall sports, football and volleyball in particular, are going to be in the Lakes Valley for one more year before they make the move into the OAA. So it'll be really interesting to see how Waterford does, how Kettering and Mott does in this conference. Because I think the OAA, honestly, is a much tougher conference than the Lakes Valley. I really do think that. Now, for Farmington's sake, Farmington schools, they said travel was the main reason why they're leaving the conference. People ask me, why would you say that? And if you want my opinion, we have the podcast up with Farmington schools leaving the conference. I had Anthony Taormina, the host of History Now, also my co-host on Between Taorminas. We have a good segment talk about that. So, you think about where this conference is. You kind of think about where the OAA is as a conference. There's so many questions. And you look at in wake of conference realignment. You kind of look at Monroe going to the KLAA. You look at, a lot of uneasiness in that conference. So it'd be really interesting to see what the KLA does in the future. It'd be really interesting to see. But when you look at the OA as a whole, you look at the success Harper Woods has had in this conference. Obviously, in football, we know how good they are. And then you look at, of course, basketball, they're starting to improve. Spring sports, they're starting to improve. Especially with the location where they're at. It's not easy for them because, one, they're in Wayne County, and that's not easy for them to have to travel north into Oakland County almost every other day. But it's also a challenge for those teams that have to make the travel down to Wayne County to take on Harper Woods. So travel, I know, is a challenge. Enrollment's going to be another interesting challenge. Because you look at the enrollment size of the OAA. Smallest school, Ferndale and Ferndale University, they do combine in football. Ferndale is one of the smallest schools. Ferndale University, I think it's the smallest enrolled school. I think they are. Either them or Harper Woods. But I think it's Ferndale University. I don't have the enrollment sheet with me. I really don't. But the biggest school in the OAA, obviously, you got the big three, the northern three, who got the bigger enrolled three. Troy's obviously, I think, the most enrolled school. You got the most kids. Them and Troy Athens got to be in the top, at least top 5 when it comes to enrollment. Then you look at the northern three, Clarkston, Lake Orion, Oxford. They're pretty good, high in enrollment too. But I know the state's been experiencing an enrollment decrease. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. Is what does conference realignment look like with the OAA? Does the league expand? I mean, especially with the success that Harper Woods has, could they look north? I mean, could they look north? Could they look south? Could they look west? You don't know. You never know. Or could they stay put? I mean, I don't see an issue why this league wouldn't stay put. There's a lot of questions as we head into the final week of the year. A lot of questions. Before I go, next week we're going to start our football call-ins. We're going to start with the coaches at West Bloomfield, Zach Hilbers, and the coach at Waterford Kettering, Brian Barnes, will be calling in next week. Talk about the respective teams as we head into the beginning months of summer. I do want to wish my congratulations to the class of 2025. Job well done. Around OAA Nation, state champions, galore. Wish everybody the best of luck as they go on to college. They go on to college in the future. And you look at next year with the OAA, starting with the 2025-2026 school year. Should be really interesting to see how it goes. A lot of questions, though, do linger. So we'll see what happens as as we head into the summer months. Of course, in basketball, we're going to keep an eye on the coaching searches over at Southfield A&T for the boys and Ferndale for the girls. Also, we're going to keep an eye when the districts get released. The MHA, I expect them will release the districts probably by next week. I'll have a preview on that with the basketball ones and also the volleyball ones. I do have a projection list on my blog at SaginawBay4650@blogspot.com. If you want to take a look at my projected districts for basketball, I do have the copy of the division sheets on there as well. So see what happens. Everybody, signing off here. Take care. God bless, and I will see you all next week, everybody. Take care and God bless all.